But your way through Mirkwood is dark, dangerous, and difficult. In there the wild things are dark, queer, and savage.
Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we will be looking at the history of Greenwood the Great, the Forest of Mirkwood. Please check out the related articles and videos in the description and cards for more information. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me. Let us journey back into Middle-earth together. Long ago in the distant memory of Middle-earth, the Great Forest of Greenwood was most likely even larger than it would be in the late Third Age, as in the years of the trees and the First Age, many of the mighty forests of the world connected to one another, spanning over vast amounts of land. The Forest River cut through the Forest of Greenwood, flowing from northwest and the mountains to the east, coming out to Long Lake. The Enchanted River would branch off of this river towards the mountains of Mirkwood, closer to the center of the forest. I believe Greenwood, as Mirkwood was called then, or Eryn Lasgalen, was perhaps greater and might have even found ways to connect with the forest, later named Lothlorien, across the River Anduin, which was also connected to the Fangorn, which itself might have been connected to the Old Forest and the woods of Beleriand. But Greenwood connecting to Lindornand is a speculation, as Anduin was a vast river. Regardless, after the awakening of the Elves in the east in 1050 of the Years of the Trees, some of the firstborn who passed this way would come to stay and reside in Greenwood, and these were the Nandor Elves, meaning those who go back. This offshooting branch of the Teleri Elves would settle in both Greenwood and Lindornand, later called Lothlorien, across the river, and they would become known as the Sylvan or Wood Elves, and would be later joined by other Avari, elves who never came west. And so, while Morgoth made his war on the Free Peoples far away, and some of his darkness perhaps lingered in Middle-earth to the east, Greenwood continued to be one of the greatest forests in the northern world. Even as the other forests dwindled, Greenwood remained quite vast. Thus, during the early Second Age, after the fall of Beleriand, Orifer, one of the elves of the Halls of Thingol in Beleriand, came from Lindon to Greenwood around 750. The Sylvan Elves would accept this elf of the Sindar as their new ruler, and his son Thranduil as their prince, and so they removed to Amon Lanc, the Naked Hill in South Greenwood, and they made their capital stronghold there. At some point in the Second Age, likely after settling in Erebor and the Iron Hills, the dwarves carved the Old Forest Road through Mirkwood, or the Dwarf Road, south of the mountains of Mirkwood. Of course, at the end of the age, the War of the Last Alliance occurred, and some of the elves of Greenwood, including King Orifer himself, marched off and would never return home. Prince Thranduil would return from the war, and would be the new king of Greenwood. He would later have a son named Legolas, who would become the most renowned figure on the world stage from the Greenwood Forest. The Third Age would bring with it many terrors into the forest, the first being the return of Sauron under the guise of a necromancer, and this darkness as well as the diminishment of their population from the war would force the Elves of Greenwood to abandon Amon Lanc, which was then taken by Sauron around 1050 of the Third Age, and remade into the fortress of Dol Guldur. For a majority of the age, Sauron would dwell here and regain power, biding his time, except for when he retreated or was forced out because of the wizard Gandalf. The Elves would move to the hills of Emendwyr, the mountains of Mirkwood. But ever the age went on, and with it other things happened. The men of Rhovanion, including the Kingdom of Rhovanion, the Woodmen, the Beornings, the later Eothade, the early Hobbits, and even Radagast the Brown made their abodes near or in Greenwood, with the Brown Wizard settling in Ruscabel, on the western side of the forest. The men of the Kingdom of Rhovanion would make an indent in the eastern part of the forest called the East Bight after they felled many trees, and this would cause that part of the forest to be less than 100 miles wide. Thus it became known as the Narrows of the Forest. Darkness would come and go with the Great Plague in the presence of nearby Easterlings, and generally the forest became more evil throughout the Third Age, as the children of Shelob, giant spiders, and other things like bats, orcs, and probably wolves would come to the forest as well, making it a dangerous place, and later giving it the name Mirkwood. All of these things caused the elven population to further diminish, and so they went even further north and created the Elvenking's halls near the Forest River, which much resembled Thingol's halls of Menegroth. By way of barrels in the river, the Elves of Thranduil were able to trade with the men of Dale and the dwarves of Erebor, and they would even continue to trade with the men of Laketown after Smaug the dragon destroyed Dale and took Erebor for himself. Those called the Raft Elves were instrumental in this trading route, as they had huts near the end of the Forest River, and would ensure that the barrels got to where they needed to be. It seems they were also likely able to use paths in the forest to trade with the Beornings and potentially even the Woodmen. However, Mirkwood was a place of fear for some years, but then, in 2941 of the Third Age, the company of Thorin Oakenshield, on their way to reclaim the Lonely Mountain from Smaug, came through Mirkwood, only to have trouble with the Enchanted River, the Great Spiders, and even the Elves of Thranduil, who captured all of them save the Hobbit Bilbo. Bilbo was able to free his friends and escape with them by way of the barrels and the Forest River. If not for this, and had the stubbornness of the hardened Elves of Mirkwood been able to last, Smaug would not have found his end soon after, nor would the Battle of Five Armies seen the defeat of so many evils in the north, which definitely aided Mirkwood. What's more is that the same year, the White Council ousted Sauron from Dol Guldur, and he would return to Mordor, which would leave the Greenwood in peace for at least a little while. But the Forest of Great Fear could only stay so peaceful for so long, and eventually Gollum was brought by Aragorn to the halls of the Elvenking, that he might be questioned and unallowed to find or hinder the Ring-Bearer. However, due to an abundance of compassion by the elves, and a coordinated effort on behalf of orcs, Gollum was soon let loose again, and Legolas would go to the Council of Elrond to bear these tidings and become a member of the Fellowship of the Ring. That same year of 3018 and in 3019, more and more enemies would amass, using Mirkwood and Dol Guldur as a gateway to attack the north. Some Nazgul would go to Dol Guldur, and one of these three, Khamûl, would later be known as the Lieutenant of Dol Guldur. Orcs and Easterlings would attack the elves, men, and dwarves of the north, and on March 15th of 3019, Thranduil and his elves would fight Sauron's orcs in the battle under the trees. It was a long and bloody battle, but the Sindar and Sylvan elves repelled the forces of Sauron in the north, and would do so for the last time as the allying elves of Lothlorien had been repelling the assaults of Dol Guldur as well. And Galadriel and Celeborn came themselves into Mirkwood. On the 28th of March, Galadriel began the destruction of Dol Guldur with her great power. Of course, Sauron was no more, so his remaining forces were on the losing side of every conflict. Thranduil and Celeborn would thereafter meet on the Elven New Year of April 6th, and they renamed the Forest of Mirkwood to Eryn Lasgalen, the Wood of Green Leaves. The northern edge of the forest to the mountains would be the realm of Thranduil. The mountains to the Narrows would be held by the Beornings and Woodmen, and from the Narrows southward would become East Lorien, held by Celeborn. However, with the end of the Third Age, and the final moments of the Elves in Middle-earth quickly approaching, these borders would probably only hold for so long. The Sylvan Elves would stay for a time untroubled in Eryn Lasgalen, and perhaps they would even rule themselves again after Thranduil departed from this Middle-earth. Mayhaps the Sylvan Elves would all leave as well, but I would imagine that some did stay in their forest, where they and their ancestors had dwelt since after the awakening of the Elves, and they would become a rustic folk of cave and dell, spirits of ancient memories of the elder race, and the Forest of Greenleaves, though ever bearing the memories and perhaps spirits of the Elves, would never forget them, though the forest would pass to the dominion of men. And so, with the Forest of Mirkwood passing from the hands of elves to those of men in later ages, we come to the end of our tale. From the story of Mirkwood, we see how much memory nature can truly carry. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this region spotlight on Mirkwood. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections on Mirkwood? I really enjoy the unsettling vastness and atmosphere of Mirkwood. It's a really interesting fantasy environment, with danger lurking behind every tree. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons, Adrian de la Torre, Chris Ortner, Kyle Wetzel, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putnam, Mark Kralik, Blair Scouten, Merton, John Hume, Jennifer Wood, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Quantum Catalyst, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Ben Gardner, Kondar, Reese Jenkins, and Adam Petrolik. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our patrons. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today, and I'll see you all again next week with a video on the epic character history of Thorin Oakenshield. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.